Namaste and greetings from Global Dialogue Foundation, Shahani Group and Meher Roshni Foundation. We welcome you, sir, for our Green Drive Fellows campaign series, where we interview our Green Drive Fellows ambassadors, who are global climate change, environmental experts and humanitarians. Today, we have with us none other than Mr. Scott Leckie, who is the Director of Displacement Solutions, a non-profit initiative designed to assist refugees and displaced persons to return and recover their original homes. An international human rights lawyer and global housing advocate, he is recognized internationally as an expert in the field of economic and social rights. He is currently a visiting professor at the Australian National University, Canberra, Australia. The threat of climate displacement looms larger over a growing number of countries. Based on more than 6 years of work by Displacement Solutions in 10 climate-affected countries, academic work on displacement and climate adaptation and the country-level efforts of civil society groups in several frontline countries. This report explores the key contention that land will be at the core of any major strategy aimed at preventing and resolving climate displacement. This innovative and timely volume coordinated and edited by the founder of Displacement Solutions, Mr. Scott Leckie, examines a range of legal, policy and practical issues relating to the role of land in actively addressing the displacement consequences of climate change. It reveals the inevitable truth that climate change displacement is already underway and being tackled in many countries. So, a very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, sir. So here goes our first question.
Okay.
Your scientific research on drought-led studies in development, displacement and resettlement is such an inspiration. Do you think there are more lessons to learn from nature?
Well, thanks for the question. I think in many regards, the entire world is living through an era where we are collectively rediscovering the importance of nature after having lived through 2 or 3 centuries during which time our collective effort as humans seemed more to try to conquer nature and to exploit nature rather than to live with it and to thrive with it. And I think more and more people are realizing, the indisputable fact that not only are we as humans part of nature, but that we destroy nature at our peril in so many, many, many different ways. And the reason that we are enduring now the beginning period, not the end, the beginning period of the impacts of climate change has everything to do with our very unusual relationship with nature over the past 200 to 300 years during the industrial age. The age in which we live now is for very good reason called the Anthropocene. This is the first human epoch in history, in all of the hundreds of generations of humans who have lived, where human beings themselves are controlling the environment on the planet. And we're not doing a very good job at it. We're doing a horrible job, in fact. And unless we fundamentally change our relationship to nature and see ourselves as part of it and understand the vital role that it plays in every aspect of our lives, in particular the quality of our lives, then we are really going to face even worse consequences in the future. So we need to take a step back, look again at nature, see what we can learn from nature, and remember that we are part of it. And if we destroy nature, in the end, we destroy ourselves.
Very true, sir. Thank you for your beautiful insights. And sir, how do you stay ahead of the latest developments in the environment sector?
Well, we have a very big global network that stretches across the entire world, and we work with people in every continent. We're talking to people every single day, all around the world, who are really working and living in climate hotspots. Prior to COVID, of course, we were physically able to go to all of these places, and things have been put on hold very much in the last 2 years. But nonetheless, we remain, very engaged with people living and dealing with the consequences of climate change already. Of course, we read all of the academic and professional and UN literature about these matters. We watch every film that comes out. We learn as much as we can every single day about the impacts of climate change. And we focus not so much on the scientific or technical side, much more on the human side, much more on what's happening to ordinary people in villages across the world, in small towns, in big cities, in the countryside, in rural areas, because of climate change. And even more than that, our aim is to really try to protect the rights of those people, whether it's in India or whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in South Africa or Fiji or anywhere, to make sure that people who are impacted by climate change are treated as citizens and as rights holders, and that it's important to point out that it's incumbent on governments everywhere, local governments, state governments, national governments, and the international community, to also see climate change and in particular the displacement that's caused by climate change as a human rights issue. And every government has to have in place certain laws and certain policies and programs to protect those rights. And that's what we're pushing for all the time in every country in the world. No country is too rich to do it. No country is too poor to do it. Every single country can do it. And that's the message that we're pushing all of the time. People need to be treated as rights holders, and we are on the verge of a mass displacement crisis because of climate change, far bigger than anything the world has ever seen before. Hundreds of millions of people will lose their homes in the coming decades because of the impacts of climate change, and we need to be ready for it. And we can be ready for it. There is enough land to go around. We just need to make sure that that land is accessible to everyone and that everybody can get land for land they lose and homes for homes they lose.
Thank you, sir. How is COVID-19 an environmental health issue?
COVID-19 is sort of affects every aspect of life now across the world. There's many ways to look at COVID, both just in the practical sense of people being infected with a disease that they don't have immunity against, and obviously the amount of human suffering involved. But there are some positive things that have emerged as a result of COVID being there. And one is that the world, was forced again, it should be obvious to everyone everywhere, but it was forced again to realize that we all share this planet together. There is no difference between people from any country. We are all ultimately the same. And COVID reminds us of that, and it shows very clearly that as long as some of us are not safe, none of us are safe. It also showed that when we do come together, and scientists from across the world, for instance, go into the laboratory together, incredible things can happen at an incredibly fast speed. The speed with which they came up with vaccines against this horrible disease was unprecedented. And it shows what we can do when we come together. Now, what's not good is that it also shows us how incredibly inequitable the world is, how unfair and unequal the world is. And if you wanted to see any symbol of that, it is who has the vaccine now and who doesn't have the vaccine now in the world. And as you know very well, the highly developed, wealthy northern countries have a hugely disproportionate amount of vaccines available and a vaccinated population. People in the global south, including India and where you are and other countries as well, have much fewer people vaccinated and much less access to the vaccines. And we really need to change that. So COVID shows what's positive in a human sense in terms of us coming together, realizing we're all in it together, realizing that we have a lot of very smart people who can come up with ways of fighting diseases like this, but also makes us realize how unfair the world remains, even in 2021, and how far we have to go to make sure that everybody everywhere has the same access to the same life-saving medicines, and also other attributes of a full life: a decent place to live, clean water, clean air, a job, money in the bank, all of those things that people everywhere need. There's no difference. People are all the same, ultimately, all across the world. And we really need to have structures in place that recognize that.
Thank you so much, sir. A beautiful answer.
My pleasure.
Sir, do you believe our environment is getting polluted day by day? If yes, then how will you overcome it?
Well, unfortunately, the facts are that the world has never been more polluted than it is today. And whether in terms of the ocean, whether in terms of the air, whether in terms of even the atmosphere and space as well. I mean, there's space junk circling the planet all of the time. Thousands and thousands of pieces are circulating all around our planet. We have more than 7 million people died last year from air pollution alone. Many, many of whom live in India, unfortunately, by the way. And we simply shouldn't have that situation, The right to breathe clean air is a human right. And it's something that everybody, without even thinking about it, and certainly without having to fight for it, should automatically have from the day they're born till the day they die. And unfortunately, in much of the world, that's not the case. And we need to do whatever we can to not only reduce air pollution, but reduce the causes of air pollution, help people to, be able to live in places where the air is clean and fresh. And added to that, of course, we have to think about plastic production. We have to think about solid waste contamination of the oceans and the rivers. As well, let's not forget that we're also living through an extinction crisis. And there's been, thousands and thousands of species will go extinct this year and next year and the next year. Some animals, some plant. But on and on it goes, as if people, are treating, at least those with power, are treating the world as if it's this infinite supply source of whatever they want to get their hands on. And it isn't. We live on a finite planet. And we know, and science tells us clearly, that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the universe, right? We live in one of those out of 2 trillion. And as far as we know, we're the only one where there's life. And so it's up to us, humans, all 8 billion of us, to come together and say enough is enough. We need to have a planet for our children and our children's children, and then 10, 20, 500, 1,000 generations down the road also. And we need to put systems in place, economic systems and political systems, environmental management systems, that will allow that to happen. There's a lot of people trying to do that. Millions of people are trying and trying and trying in all sorts of different ways to improve the natural environment and to reduce pollution, etc. But they're up against a big battle. They're up against a whole series of entities, big corporations, governments, the military industrial complex that pervades so many countries, that makes it extremely difficult to win that battle for a cleaner and better and healthier environment. But we have no other choice. I mean, we have to push onwards, and instead of treating the world like a grab bag of things to exploit and make money from, we need to see it as the source of life and treat it like that, and really reconsider this entire era of consumption in which we live. We've almost entirely changed the dynamic of what it means to be human in the last decades, not very long, just in the last century or two, where people, instead of being citizens and active participants in making society better, they have simply become consumers. They're not even voters anymore. They're just consumers. And it's your duty in life to consume and to consume as much as possible and make economic growth in your country as high as possible. And only in that do we measure success. And we need to really reconsider that equation, because that equation is ending up, in the end, going to kill us all. We need to live in a much, much more sustainable way than we are at present. And that starts with every individual trying to consume less, but our governments and our leaders and our politicians and in particular large multinational corporations really reevaluating, what it means to be a good global citizen, a good corporate citizen, a good government citizen, and see better ways to move forward in protecting the environment.
Indeed, sir. So, sir, what, according to you, is the biggest environmental threat today?
Oh, there's so many, I almost don't know where to start, but I mean, I'd say clearly it has to be climate change. But, deforestation is also huge. Obviously, the pollution of the oceans is huge. Air pollution is huge. But on top of all of them, from the effects of climate change, it's just a question of how severe it will impact upon you. And as we see, all of the estimates of what the temperature will be in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years have been shown to have been wrong by a large amount. So let me give just one example. An issue we work on all the time is sea level rise and the melting of ice, which then goes into the ocean, combined with the heating of the world's temperatures, which also makes the water in the oceans expand. And those factors and others are leading to the seas of the world rising. And they are rising at a much, much faster rate all around the world than was originally projected, say 30, 40 years ago when initial projections began. As a result of that, it means that people along all of the coastlines of the world are going to have to move in much larger numbers, much sooner than was originally projected. And that includes where I am talking from, which is Australia. It includes where you're speaking from, which is India. And it includes every country that has a coastline. There's 365,000 kilometers of coastline in the world, with hundreds of millions of people living along them. And not everyone will be impacted in the same way, but many, many, many millions upon millions of people will need to move from where they are now. And right now, there's not enough governments in the world that are ready to deal with that problem. So that's I think if you took all of the various environmental problems in the world, there's also desertification as well, and more places becoming desert. There's obviously drought, which is also an environmental issue caused often and in many instances by climate change. But I think if you take all of them together, I would say it's climate change, which is the number one culprit and the number one thing that needs to be tackled. And hopefully next month in Glasgow at COP26, there will be important decisions made that actually help us get ahead of the game. Because since the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, one of the most important treaties ever concluded by governments anywhere, every year global CO2 levels have actually increased since 2015. Global CO2, carbon dioxide, is not going down. It is going up. And let me give one final example. I have lots of friends and colleagues that work in the Arctic and in cold, frozen parts of the world. Climate change is affecting those areas much, much faster and much worse than anywhere else in the world. So you have whole millions of square kilometers of land which was permanently frozen. It's called permafrost, which is now beginning slowly but surely to melt. And when that melts, it's not CO2 that gets released, which is bad enough, but it's methane that gets released, which is, I believe, 10 times worse for climate change. And so you have this huge mass melt off occurring in all of the frozen parts of the world. And it's important to point out that if all of the ice in the world were to melt, like all of Antarctica and Greenland and the Arctic and all of the glaciers, including in the Himalayas, if they were all to melt, global sea levels would be almost 60 meters higher than they are today. 60 meters. So everywhere within 60 meters elevation or less from coastlines of the world today, like Mumbai, for instance, will be underwater. And, things have gotten so bad already in 2021 that the city of Jakarta in Indonesia, the capital of Indonesia, with more than 15 million people, if you take all of the metropolitan area, it's probably 25 million people. They have made a decision already to move the capital. So just imagine that, moving 25 million people from the island of Java to a whole nother island. They're not even staying on the same island. They're moving somewhere else. So just imagine the cost and the human tragedy that will be associated with that. Even Lagos, Nigeria has begun speaking about the need to move.
Yes, sir, true. Thank you for sharing the wonderful information and the experience you have. So, sir, do you think recycling is an important community service?
Yes, it is, of course. And I mean, it gives everybody the feeling that they themselves can become part of the solution. But it's only one part of it. What's also really important is the production process. So, I've been to India many times, for instance, and starting all the way back in the 1980s, and one of the things I was amazed by at that time was how many things you would encounter in India that were made from biomass. So, very often I was served a meal on a big leaf, and very often I was given, I was never given a plastic bottle of water. I was given a glass bottle of water. And there's so many other things I could tell you about, a really kind of sustainable way of having life play itself out. Now, if you go to India, you will encounter plastic bottles of water everywhere. You will not be served your meal on a leaf. You'll probably be served your meal on a paper or plastic plate with plastic knives and forks, and that you will then throw away, So that's not, and you will be given a plastic bag for the extra food. So, it's all about the production as well as recycling. So we need to get the production side of the equation such that the only things that are produced are things that are truly recyclable and truly biodegradable and truly consistent with what nature can handle. One of the things that I mention to my students at law school when I teach all the time, when I start the class, is there's two words that you need to banish from your language, and one is away, because we always talk about, oh, we'll just throw it away. We'll just give me that plastic bottle, I'll throw it away. Every single person listening to this, when they were a child, they were probably at some point given a plastic toothbrush from the dentist or from your parents. I can guarantee you with 100% certainty, no matter where you are in India, exists in this world. It's in the ground in some dump somewhere, but it hasn't biodegraded. It's just making more pollution. And we can give that example across the board. So recycling is one thing, but it's really about production.
Okay, sir. Sir, what inspired you to become an environmentalist?
I mean, so many things. I don't know. I mean, it's almost impossible to say, but I think just at a very young age, swimming in the ocean and realizing that it was just such an extraordinary feeling, and then hiking across mountains and just being in the middle of nature for weeks and weeks and seeing, its power, and with no human intervention. I think one of the greatest one of the greatest phrases of all time is that, you know, humans need nature, but nature does not need humans. Nature will go on in some way, with or without us. We cannot, however, go on without nature. And so I think that's a big part of it. And also just seeing, you know, I've worked in almost half of the world's countries. I've worked in more than 80 countries. And I've visited hundreds and hundreds of slums, you know, busties, you know, chawls, you know, popular communities, places like exist in every Indian city and every developing country. Many, 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 many times I've worked and had activities in slums. And there you really see how nature can be degraded and destroyed. And it just shocked me every time, and it still does, when I see the conditions that people are forced to live in because they have to. And the environmental conditions in those slums. And not just there, but just globally, there's so much what's called degraded land that was exploited, for trees were cut down or it was mined or whatever. And now it's just a wasteland. And you see that everywhere, you know, in a planet that gives us everything we could need. It gives us everything we could have, everything we would need to make a complete ecological paradise. It's all here. It's right here, right now. We could do it. And instead we destroy it, you know? And it's just, you know, it's heartbreaking when you see that over and over again. And people equate environment with wealth creation instead of environment with healthy, happy, long, prosperous life. And that's where we really need to turn things around. You know, we need to see nature as not something to be exploited, but something to live in and live with. And if we do that, then we can continue on for millennia to come as the dominant species on this planet. And if we don't, all we'll end up doing is kind of bringing to a premature end the experiment that is the human race. And I don't really want that option. I want one where our species goes on and gets better and better. And I'm afraid if we don't start taking nature and environment seriously, we simply won't have that opportunity.
Fantastic, sir. Fantastic. Sir, would you like to say a few words for Global Dialogue Foundation?
Well, I'd just like to greet everybody that's associated with Global Dialogue Foundation and say that it's a very important movement, and it's one that's, you know, grounded in really important principles, which again recognizes the shared attributes that all of us have as humans everywhere, and that it gives us a reminder that with dialogue, with talking, and with contact, in particular contact, it's easy to think of the world as one place and to theorize about it. But when you actually go and interact with people from other parts of the world, that's the trigger that really gets people to understand that we're all the same ultimately. And it doesn't matter if somebody's from Botswana or from Berlin or from, you know, Belgium or Beijing. It doesn't matter at all. And it doesn't matter if they're man or woman. It doesn't matter if they're young or old, or if they're Buddhist, or if they're Hindu, or if they're Christian, or if they're Muslim, or if they're Jain, or if they're any religion, or if they're atheist. None of it really matters. And it doesn't matter what their nationality is. It doesn't matter what their passport says. You know, what matters to me ultimately is that we're all the same. We're so much more the same than we're different. And it's our differences, which are very small, which are the cultures that we all enjoy. And that makes life beautiful. And it's weaving those cultures all together in a way of mutual respect that can allow us once and for all to live on a planet that is so much better than it has ever been in terms of understanding, in terms of peace, in terms of security, in terms of prosperity, in terms of, you know, standard of living, life expectancy, all of these important things. And I think Global Dialogue really recognizes that also and pushes that message. And that's what I hope they will continue to do and grow. and bring us ever closer to greater and greater unity.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, one last.
My pleasure.
What is that you would advise our audience to do in their daily lives and become our Green Drive Fellows?
Well, and there's lots of things. I mean, you know, India is, if we're speaking about India mostly, you know, a country of 1.4 billion people, that's a lot of people doing a lot of things every day, you know, and you're kind of at a crossroads now, like at a developmental crossroads, moving very quickly, going up and up and up with economic growth every year and all of that, and joining the world economy more than you have for many hundreds of years. India used to be one of the world's biggest economies, of course. People forget that. But before colonization, India was, I think India was India and China together were 35% of the world economy before the industrial age came. So, you know, there's no shortage of experience being an economic power. But what ordinary people have to do to push things forward is just think as much as you can about what you're doing each day, every time you do anything that has an environmental impact. So when you go to your office, will you walk? If you can walk, you should walk. If you can take a bike, you should take a bike. If you can take a three-wheeler, well, okay, but maybe the bus is even better. So think about how you transport yourself around. Think about the things you can do in your immediate neighborhood instead of having to travel far. The less you travel, the less impact you have on the environment. Every time you use water, is there a way to save water? Is there a way to recycle that water? Is there a way to use the water that you used in your shower, maybe, to use in your garden later to water the plants? If you can grow your own food, can you do that even in the cities? And you probably can more than you think. Can you buy glass bottles instead of plastic bottles? Can you buy a bar of soap instead of soap in a plastic bottle? There's all these types of decisions you can make. Can you buy recycled paper instead of new paper? The list goes on and on and on. So it's really a question of thinking about it, and you know, try to generate as little waste as you can, and try to use as few resources as you can, and you'll be surprised that oftentimes you can have an incredibly high quality of life using very few resources. And it's not about consuming. Consumption will never bring you happiness, because you will never have enough if you keep consuming and consuming and consuming. And you will never be free. So to me, you measure freedom not by how much you have, but how easily you can live with little. And that goes especially for wealthy countries like Australia, where I live, but it also goes for India and Africa and South America and North America. Although it goes for the whole world. And so I think that's the kind of main message. We are nature, and nature is us, and everything that we do has an environmental impact. And yes, we cannot control what big companies do. We can't control what the mining companies do, digging holes out of the ground or chopping trees down. It's very difficult for us to change that behavior. We can push for it politically and socially, but as individual people and as families, from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed, think about what your own individual impact is, and remind your friends and relatives and colleagues and others in your community to do the same. And you will see, the more environmentally sustainable your community is, the more ecologically minded people are in your immediate area, you will see people get happier. You will see people be more friendly. You will see people enjoy life much more. And so I guess that would be my message.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, sir. So here's the message for our dear audience. If you would like to join our Green Drive Fellows campaign, I can do it, so can you. Please write to us at uidindia2016@gmail.com. Let us all come together and do our bit to save Mother Earth.